Thanks. So we're going to talk today about the squat and a form of its technique. And why I say a form of this technique is we've all learned from different people. Some of us have learned Olympic style high bar, knees over the toes, front squats. All of those are applicable to everything. The only reason that I think my way is a little more optimal is because a lot of this seminar and symposium is talking about weak points, especially with Scott talking about the potentiation warm-ups, right? We talk about posterior chain and those types of things. The back squat, when you try to keep your shin straight, is almost predominantly posterior chain. That's why it's important. That's why it's needed in sports, is because if you give somebody an Olympic style squat, it's natural to just bend your knees over your toes, right? It's unnatural to keep your shin straight, sit back and use your hamstrings, glutes, and low back. So if I were to take a hand of our athletes that we've all trained or been around, how many of them would say it's a quadricep weakness? Not that many. But how many of you say, well, my guys have really weak hamstrings, really weak low back, glute firing issues, all that shit, right? That's a big deal. Well, wouldn't we want to put ourselves in a squat position at least a lot of the times that fixes those areas? My answer would be yes. So this is a picture of me squatting world record 832 in 2014, and then I took it up higher to 865 the next year, and that's completely raw, just belt only and singlet. Lifting background, I bench 6'11" in a full meet at 293 body weight. So I know a little bit about bench pressing. Total 2665 is a world record total in full multiply gear, back when that was popular. Thank God that's over. A raw 865 world record belt only squat, and then equipped 1197.6 squat, which is still one of the deepest and better ones I've ever seen. But the point being is that at that time, that's when powerlifting, that's what it was. You got into full gear if you were good enough and you hit the biggest numbers you could hit. Now I'm proud to say it switched back more to raw. And luckily I was young enough, smart enough, and not injured enough to go back to raw, because everybody used to ask me, well, Matt, you know, your style of squatting, that doesn't work for raw guys. That doesn't work for athletes. Well, bullshit, it doesn't. Because I took all that stuff off, my technique looked exactly the same and still broke more world records. So there's something to be said for that. So what have I done in the professional background? Scott's hit on a little bit. Bachelor's of Exercise Science from 99 to 03 at Ball State when Dr. Kramer, which is an NSCA founder, was there and under all of his guys. So I was really lucky at that point. An MS in sports biomechanics under Dr. Robert Newton from Edith Cowan University in Australia, which was also a sidekick guy to Dr. Kramer. And then I've been a contractor for the Army, Border Patrol, and I have 5 fire departments that I'm in charge of back home in Columbus. So what I'm going to teach you today is not only how I broke a lot of world records and stayed injury-free, but also how I've worked with these departments the last 10 years and lowered injury rates, decreased insurance costs, blah, 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 blah. So the first department that I started to work this with that I've had the longest, I started them in late 2007, early 2008. When I got there, they were spending $500,000 a year on paid time off, insurance costs, and injuries. And what were the injuries coming from? They were coming from picking up obese patients and taking them to the hospital. The average body weight now of a person walking around, a female, is the same weight the male was in 1965. Now the males are almost 60 pounds heavier than they were in 1965, on average. So back in the day, in the 60s and 70s and maybe even the 80s, you could have got away with being a fireman and being weak, because you're not going to pick up heavy people all that often. I remember even when I was in school in the 80s and 90s, in grade school and high school, that if you were an overweight person, you were a minority still. If you were the fat kid in class, you were the minority. Now you're the majority. Okay? How do you think that happens when our diets are messed up? We know how it happens. But my point is that what do you think happens to the firemen that have to take these guys that are having heart attacks and strokes that weigh 350, 400 pounds? You can't be an average guy and walk in and pick those kind of people up. That's where they called me in. Hey, you're an expert in strength. We need to get super strong because these overweight patients are killing our insurance costs. Fast forward to 2012, 13, we took like a data sample again. The insurance companies did. I didn't have any control over it. We were spending $70,000 a year in insurance premiums, $500,000 to $70,000. And what was crazy is that the average age went up 5 years. So we didn't retire a bunch of old guys, right, and get a bunch of new guys in. We kept a lot of the same guys in the study for almost 10 years, Well, 6 years at that point, almost 10 now. Last year, we spent $42,000. Average age was 47. When I started, it was 39. So they're almost 10 years older. It's been almost 10 years, and now we've cut the insurance costs down 80%. So as you can probably tell, I'm gonna have that job as long as I want it. But how does this transfer over to athletes? Very simple. I would train them the same way I would train an athlete. I'm always assessing weak points, always making them strong in weak link areas, and always assessing their movements, no matter if it's a warm-up or a max effort exercise. So that's how I do with all of these people, and that's how it works, okay? So opening statements. No other lower body exercise in existence delivers more bang for the buck than a basic barbell squat. We agree? Okay, you better agree. Deep squats improve jumping, sprinting performance, and help create more stabilization in the knee and lower extremities. That's by one of my mentors, Charles Poliquin. Those all sound really important, whether you're a fireman, an athlete, an aging athlete, a strength coach. You know, that's one of the biggest things that I have a pet peeve on. Do not teach people how to do stuff if you can't do it well, okay? The whole reason that I got into lifting when I was a kid is because like every other kid you pick up, you want to be the strong muscular guy. You want to be the Arnold Schwarzenegger. You want to be the Sylvester Stallone. Until I met him in person, he was 5'4", not that impressive. But point being is, those are the kind of things that draw in the normal people. When I started going to school for it, I wanted to be the guy that everybody came to and goes, hey, that guy's done some big stuff. He's done it a long time. He's done it injury-free. I want to talk to him about it. So mixing the schooling and the practicality is what gave me an edge and what can give you guys an edge. Bone density is drastically increased in a relatively short period of time when performing back squats. We all need more bone density, especially since 85, 90% of our workforce now is sitting at a desk. So if you're talking just training general population, most of the people that are going to walk in are going to be people that don't do active things for their job. Guess what happens to your bones after a while? Bones are like muscles in the case that if you don't use them, they're not there. Bones eventually go away if they don't get pressure on them. Muscles go away if they don't get worked out. So all of these areas have some sort of significance in a different way, but we see the significance nonetheless. So we should know to do squats, how many sessions per week? This is one of those slides I put in because we're so confused. You see so many people talk about, and sorry that's a typo up there, but we see so many people talk about squatting 3 times a week, 4 times a week, squatting every day. It's ridiculous, right? If you look at the top guys in the world or Olympic lifting, they don't do big squats like that more than a couple times a week. Why? It's not what you can do, it's what you can recover from. If you can't recover from a session and be ready 3 days later, there's no point in doing that session. You're just overtraining. And the problem with training and being strong and practicing it yourself is that if you tend to like to do that, which if you do, you're the minority of the population, but if you do, you tend to overtrain constantly. The trick is finding that fine balance between training as hard as you can and recovering as good as you can until the next time you have to do it. That becomes very, very tedious to not only understand, but also putting in mind that it's different for everybody. If somebody comes out of pro football and they're used to training at that level, their ability to recover from squatting or lifting is going to be much higher than a kid that never even had a gym class. They're not the same. Even if they come out the same strength, which is highly unlikely, they're not going to recover the same because their athletic background's not the same. That's kind of like when you take these high-level things, CrossFit things, right? And you put in an ex-Division I wrestler, and then you show them this work capacity that's through the moon, and then a 16-year-old's like never worked out, and you give them that workout, they're going to kill themselves, right? But we all market that kind of stuff to that, and we don't really need to do that. So the body cannot withstand more than squatting every 72 hours. This mostly has to do with the CNS, but most of the best lifters in the world do this, and so you should too. And the first place I ever read it was a book from A.S. Medvedev talking about maximal effort and dynamic training and how much time it should be separating the law of 72 hours. So your leg training, you really can't, if it's high intensity, you can't do it more than twice a week, any muscle group. It's also important to be strong for influence to RPE. And this is what I don't see a lot of people talking about. If I'm super strong, let's say I bench 611. If I want to go out and do an endurance workout with 225 in the bench, I can do that. But if your bench is only 250, you can't. So RPE starts to drastically change when you get super strong, right? So sometimes your athletes, especially if their anaerobic endurance is suffering, I can almost guarantee you their maximal strength is low. Why? If you grab something and it's a 3 out of 10, it's going to be a lot easier to do, and you can do it a lot longer than if somebody grabs something and says it's a 7 out of 10, right? If I take a weight and it's 7, mentally, if it's a 7 out of 10, how long do you think that's going to happen? Not very long. But if it's only a 3, right, it's already mentally been defeated, and now you can just kill it. So a lot about being strong is about reducing the rate of perceived exertion. And I always work down on a 1 to 10 scale. So if I want to make something endurance, it's got to be around a 2, 3, or a 4. It starts getting up 5, 6, 7, 8. It's not endurance anymore because you can't do it long enough, right? So if I want to bench 135 for a minute, I better be able to bench 315 or more. Make sense? So the hard part about training correctly is trying to stay in this gray area on this big peak here. So if we don't train enough, let's say we only train once a month, it's not going to be enough to really cause any issues. It's not going to make any change, really. If we only train once a week, it's going to do better. You know, it's going to be up here in the middle. It's going to do better, but we're not in the gray. If we're training 3 to 4 times a week, now we're in the gray if we can withstand and recover that, and we're going to make optimal gains. We can't do more than that, or we're going to start having strong anxiety or complete meltdown. So what are the first key signs to anybody that you're overtraining? Does anybody know? Heart rate increases, yeah. Let's just talk about normal stuff. But that's a normal thing, but it's hard, you know, some people don't know how to measure that. The first thing is, that I've dealt with and seen, loss of appetite. Ask an athlete, hey, what'd you eat today? Oh man, I just wasn't that hungry. Strike one. I'm already looking at what's going on. Because as soon as you lose appetite, it's an easy one to see or talk about. That can be a huge component to overtraining. The next thing is constant soreness. The next thing starts to become psychological. Oh man, everything feels heavy today. Everything doesn't feel correct. You know, 225 feels like 405 today. Those are the key tail signs of being overtrained. But you are never going to know that unless you push yourself, right? Every athlete that comes into me and I train, I never overtrain them. You know why? Because I've overtrained the shit out of myself for 25 years. I know the signs, and I fix it before they do. But if I wouldn't have tried to push myself to the absolute limit, there's some of this stuff you just can't read in books, right? There's some of this stuff you have to learn by bleeding and sweating, you know? So point being is that you got to stay in that gray area or you're just not doing anything in the gym. Overtraining, in my opinion, is worse than doing nothing at all. We fair with that? So the thought process for squats are really any major core, what I would consider core lift, squatting, deadlifting, benching, power cleans, you know, snatches, any of those things. The first thing is we have to increase maximal strength. So if we look at the force equation, F equals M times A, if we're going to increase maximal strength, then our focus is on the M. How much mass can we move? How much is on the bar? The problem is that tends to be all of our thought pattern. That's the only thing we think about is how much weight is on the bar. That is only one side of being forceful. The other side is increasing dynamic strength. So instead of working on how much mass is on the bar, we're focusing on an optimal amount of mass moving at a maximal amount of speed. Both of them create high force output, right? So if I put you out on the street and I hit you with a 50,000-pound dump truck, it's going to hurt, right, at 5 miles an hour. It's still going to hurt because it's heavy. And it's not going to stop immediately. It's going to take 10 feet for it to stop, right, because it's so much inertia. That's max effort. If I take a 50 cal bullet and put it in a new Barrett sniper rifle and shoot you with it and blow you in half, that bullet's not that heavy. How did it kill you? How did it cut you in half? It cut you in half because the acceleration was so crazy high that when it hit you, it just blew you to pieces. So that's how I kind of look at getting stronger and getting faster. Day one, I'm going to shoot myself with a bullet. Day two, I'm going to hit myself with a dump truck. But then one day you might have something like that. But the point is that if I'm thinking that way, it almost impossible to overtrain once I can withstand 2 heavy workouts and legs a week because I'm working different sides of the force equation. Make sense? One day I'm working on getting as fast and as explosive as I can, and the next day I'm working as strong as I can. How many of you guys train like that? Ugh. How many articles do I have to write? I don't know. I always thought if I broke a bunch of records and like got a master's degree, people would like read and listen to my shit, but you know it's weird. It doesn't work that way. So thought process, we're going to increase flexibility, bone density, and lower injury. Okay? I train my 65-year-old women just like I told you. I have 6 women that weigh under 140 that are over 57, 58 years old that can deadlift 300 to 350. So you're telling me I have 60-year-old women that can outlift most of the strength coaches? That doesn't make any sense. It does to me. But the point is that, well, is that dangerous for somebody that's old? It's only dangerous if you start there. I didn't start them there. I worked them to that point. Okay? This angle for all coaches, regardless of clients or athletes, it doesn't matter. If you want to get stronger, you have to get faster. If you want to get faster, you have to get stronger. Right? Weights are inevitable. So, squatting for maximal strength. So now we're going to work on the M part of the equation. Maximal strength is a component on which all other muscle contractions are based. We talked about RPE, right? If I can deadlift 600, 135 is nothing to me. How many of you guys seen Brian Shaw? I think it was Brian Shaw that took that 135 snatch and beat that CrossFitter to pieces with it, even though he's 6'9" and weighs 450 pounds. I think he did 100 reps way faster than the other guy. Because why? Because it was heavy to the other guy. For Brian Shaw, it was like picking up his underwear. Right? But you get my point. Why can he do that? He can do that because he can deadlift 1,000 freaking pounds. It's 10% of his max. So if that 100-pound dumbbell that the biggest one the NSCA has is only 10% of my max, is that heavy? No. But for most people it is, because that's 100% of your max. So you decrease RPE if you want to get super strong. Because with athletes, maximal strength is not the end all. It's a bridge gap. What do I mean by that? I mean, if I get my athlete strong, then I can raise how much I can do with speed work, right? So if I have an athlete that comes to me and benches 250, I can only do speed work with 90 to 100 pounds to make it fast enough. But what if that athlete benches 405? Now he can do speed work with 200. Now we're talking. That is real force output. Does that make sense? So it's almost it's the necessary evil. You have to get super strong in order to be able to move things super fast at relative weight. So if I need to have speed work at 1 meter per second, it's got to be between 30 and 40%. If it's got to be between 30 and 40% of what? Well, if it's 100 pounds, it's nothing. But if it's 600 pounds, it's significant. Does that make sense? So strength is relative, but it's relative in order to be able to increase how much you can do for speed. That's the real kickback and the real need for athletics, is can we move a moderate weight insanely fast? If we can do that, doing really well. Maximal strength when using back squat involve almost every muscle group. 2 areas that I have tweaked squatting. 1, pec. 2, upper back. Okay, never in the leg. Why? Because all those muscles are so screaming when I got 3.5, 4 times body weight on me that everything has to contract. So the squat, when you know how to bench press correctly, and when you know how to deadlift correctly, is every muscle. Entirely every muscle in your body. If that wasn't true, then how could these guys lift this much weight, right? There might be muscles that actually do the work, but every muscle is 100% contracted, okay? Performance of every sport is increased with stronger back squats, bar none. And I think we've kind of went over why, right? If I'm a 130-pound soccer player and I can squat 350, my ability to change direction if I train correctly is going to be way increased based off another guy that can only squat 185. And I'm going to hold together longer, which in turn is going to allow me to do it longer, which is going to make me faster than the next person, et cetera, et cetera. All this stuff is related. The problem is that most people don't want to strain their balls off, right? We want to go do our little warm-ups and, you know, okay, we're going to work on technique today. You don't see technique with world-class weights. You know why? Because it has to be there or they're going to get broken in half. With an athlete, you have to be a little more careful, but you also got to make sure that you're not swinging too far to that one side of the pendulum and just being a rehab guy, okay? The reason that all these performance centers open up and can take these high-level college athletes and make them look amazing in the combine is because they actually train them. That's it. I've seen it. My good friend that I went to school with, Pete Bomarito, max effort squats every week. Do you know how many of his players tell me that they don't do that in college? 95% of them. Because they're too scared to get them hurt, right? The only way you can get these guys hurt is by doing things incorrectly. You have 2 things that most people don't know. And that is you have a training max and you have a competition max. Now, that has more to do with powerlifting and Olympic lifting than it does sports, but hear me out. A training max should be based on technique alone. Technique usually falters above 90%. So what I do with my athletes is I push them up to 90%. If their technique still looks good, I'll let them do another one. If it's not, that's where they stop. Technical max, training maximum. But I have other days where it's balls to the wall. The trick is picking balls to the wall exercises that can't get screwed up. If I make them do, like you'll see in a couple videos, we'll use a lot with athletes, concentric squats, where the bar is hanging in a chain, and then it's down here. They have to crawl under it, and they have to stand up from the top. If they lose their balance or they can't lift it, they just set it back down. Isn't that still maxing? Yes. But it's safer than having to have 10 spotters, right? So it's having that ability to look at your environment and what's around you and pick and select proper movements that are safe to max with. And that's what I find the biggest problem is with most strength coaches. They don't do it, so everything's dangerous, right? And they don't play around with enough exercises to have a big enough library to rotate enough exercises to where it actually works. Make sense? So, can't see the nosebleed, but it's there. So that's 700 pounds on the bar with a bar that has a 90-degree bends. That thing is like this all the way down, but you don't see it because I'm locked in real tight, plus 200 pounds of chain. There's only a handful of guys in the world that can do that, and I'm one of the few that can only do it under 300 pounds. But the point is that that max is a lot different than the next one that, I don't know if, I think the next one's on there, but maybe it's not. If it's not, I'll talk about it. But why would I do that instead of squat with a straight bar? Variety. Why do I need variety? Right. How can I max every week with the same stimulus? I can't. Plus, ask yourself this question. If I have an athlete that can max with a straight bar and straight weight and do pretty well at it, is that athlete better than an athlete that can squat 20 different ways and do it perfect and strong? Not even close. So if you're looking at transfer to sport, you want 25 different types of squats that they're all good at. You can't pick the bad one, right? So I can do 900 with that. I can do 900 with a straight bar. I can do 900 with a safety bar. I can do 900 with bands or chains. I can do 900 to a box. I can take the box away and do it with no box. But that allows me to do it every week. So who gets stronger? The guy that can strain every week or the guy that has to back off all the time because they don't have enough stimuluses? That's how conjugate works. The problem is you have to have an open mind and develop new exercises constantly so you can go heavy every week. Traditional weight training will only take you so far. The Soviets figured that out in the 60s with all of their Olympic athletes. So this didn't come from Louis Simmons and powerlifting. This came from A.S. Medvedev, Verkhoshansky, all the big timers over in the Soviet Union. They were trying to figure out a way to make the power clean and the snatch go up. They found really, really quick within the first 10 to 12 years that if they trained the classic lifts over and over again, it broke a bunch of people off. They weren't actually getting any better. So by the time the Soviet Union collapsed, they had 75 variations of the Olympic lifts, and they rotated them constantly. So that way they could go heavy on them every week, and they could rotate them so that they got the overuse injuries out of the way. Make sense? So if you squat with a straight bar and straight weight every week and work out pretty hard with it, you're gonna have certain parts of the body that get worn down really easily, and you're gonna have other parts that never get used. But by changing the pressure gradient every week, it allows you to squat heavy every week. Make sense? I think my thing's, okay, hold on. All right. Takes a minute for it to come off the video. Okay, so increasing dynamic strength. So the next exercise, so that was week, I think 5. Week 4, so I count weeks backwards to go to a meet. Week 4, I did a safety bar with 400 pounds of band, 550 pounds of weight. Roughly 50 pounds heavier in real weight, or 50 pounds heavier in overall maximal tension, but a more band tension than weight ratio, or that was more weight to chain ratio. Does that make sense? But it was to a box because my hips were grenaded from that, and it was 2 reps instead of 1. So I changed the rep range, I changed the position, and I changed the type of tension. I can squat heavy the next week with no beat down. Make sense? That's how you use this system. But trying to think of anything else I was going to say on that. The key is variability. Like I said, you have to have a lot of different ways to do things. So the next thing is, how do we get faster? So now we're working on dynamic strength. Force equals M times A. We're going to focus on the A now mentally. This is an ability to move a sub-maximal weight with maximal velocity. Okay? When we first figured out speed work, it came from the Soviet books, and they were talking around 50 and 60%. That's where Louis gets his percentages from. I don't agree with that. The reason I don't agree with it is because Olympic lifting is surely based on explosive power. The lifts are fast, and if they're not fast, they don't move. You can't grind a clean. You can grind a back squat. You can grind a deadlift. You can't grind a clean. So what I figured out was, for powerlifting, the gradient needed to be more towards the faster side. So at 30 and 40%, I started figuring out that 1 meter per second was the bee's knees, not 0.7, okay? Which might be a little over your head if you're not studying that. But the point is, it needs to be faster so that 72 hours later I can go heavier, because an Olympic lifter doesn't go as heavy as me. They go faster. So even when they max clean, it's still fast. When I max squat, my nose is bleeding, my eyes are bloodshot. I'm grinding something out. It's insanely hard. Not that Olympic lifting is not hard, but it's still fast. So it can't be that heavy compared to them, right? I actually talked with Kokov about this quite a bit, because he's good friends with Charles. And I was asking him, I said, how do you get to where you move those weights so fast and so consistent? And he was like, I deadlift 825 pound. I weigh 220. 405, nothing to me. Ah, so you're saying the same damn thing I'm saying. And you're one of the best Olympic lifters in this generation. Interesting. So if you want to know why the United States can't beat the Soviets, it's because they're still freaking smarter than us. Even at the base level, their athletes are even smarter than most of our coaches. And from that statement alone, he was like, maximal strength is how I'm able to move those weights. Now, technique allows me to move them quickly, perfectly. But you have to be still strong enough to move them fast enough. Whereas you look over here, and I talk about all the time, I get CrossFit guys stop by, they go, man, my power clean's stuck at like 225, I can't move it. Well, what can you front squat? 250. Well, no shit. So maximal strain is 250, and you're trying to move something fast at 225. So they're trying to do speed work at 92%. Does that make sense to you? No. Alexiev had written a lot of stuff, never really got published a whole lot, but if you dig deep enough, Alexiev could do front squats with 800 pounds for a couple reps. 800 freaking pounds, front squat, held like a clean for 2. He power cleaned 572, and it held as a world record for 35 years. But he had such a strong front squat that once he cleaned it, he just smiled all day. Knew he had it. No big deal. It wasn't heavy to him. When he picked that weight up, he had an 800 pound front squat. What's 572 of 800? For a double. So if you can do 800 for 2, it's probably 840. I'd say 840, 850 would be your max 1. So let's say 850 to make the math easy. What's 572 of 850? Percentages. Somebody's got a phone out. I thought you guys were like mathematician strength coaches. What's the percentage, Zach? 67%. So it only takes 67% of his maximum to do a world record clean. Sounds like you could probably be able to do it pretty fast and fairly easy, right? Get my point? The real key in order for maximal strength to become useful is for a large range of environments, power, speed, transfer. Higher the maximal strength, heavier resistances can be used for dynamic development. 30% of 500 versus 350. So if I get a guy's deadlift up to 500, his clean's gonna go up, right? If his technique stays the same. Because whatever his old clean was is a less percentage of his total's max. Does it make sense? I mean, it's so overlooked. But the Soviets prove it time and time again with multiple generations. Super strong at front squatting and back squatting, and they make cleans look easy. So if you use Olympic lifting, which I totally agree with athletes, if done correctly, use Olympic lifting for speed. It's not a max. But if you get their front squat, their back squat, and all that shit stronger, their cleans are gonna go up. But the real limitation is their maximal strength. I would say 75 to 85% of the time, it's maximal strength is the limiting factor. So there's your squat that I do with a lot of athletes. Go down to lightly below parallel, relax, bam. Come up as fast as I can. That's like 270. So you see, I'm trying to, maximal intent. I'm trying to move that bar like it's 800 every time, 900 pounds. I'm not trying to just, oh, it's only 275, I can do this. It's boom, 800, 900 pounds of force from the bottom. Concentric squat, that's a great way to max for athletes. Why? Set the chains at the depth that you desire and turn away. Where are they gonna go? But how many of you guys seen people pinned in a squat, walking it out, they got shitty spotters because it's all their football boys, and then the bar falls on the ground and then everybody's freaking out because somebody's tore all the hair off their scalp because they dropped it over backwards, right? There's nowhere to go with this. You get in trouble and you can't lift it, just set it down. Am I right? But how many of you guys have ever used this type of squat? 2 people in this whole, 3 in this whole class. It's more impressive than the last class. But point being is, you get my point? So I found not only a way to do speed in a different way, but I can max that way if I wanted to as well, right? You can go down to the hardware store and get those chains for $5. So don't tell me you don't have them. It's like you used to have an excuse as a strength coach, well, we don't have bands. What do you mean you don't have bands? A whole set is $50. Back when we first started playing with them, when they only came from Jump Stretch, they were like $300 or $400 for a set. Now they're free shipping and $60 for a whole set because there's 10 companies or 20 companies that make them. So point being is, have bands. We must get stronger in order to get faster and vice versa. We talked a little about that. Nothing retains type 2 fibers like max effort and dynamic effort training. You can't get that type of type 2 retainment with volume. You guys ever seen a pro bodybuilder retire and the next day they look like the next year they look like a normal dude? It's because their entire strength base is built on sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, not actin and myosin hypertrophy, which comes from max and speed work. If you don't know what all that is, go read up. But I'm not here as a physicist, but my point is that most people age and lose their ability to be powerful because they're getting weaker and they don't train speed work, right? The old person doesn't fall because they don't know that they're falling. It's because they're too slow to catch themselves anymore, right? I used to think that, like all you guys, I'm not going to be what I am in 25 years, but I'll be a lot better than the guy that's as old as me in 25 years. See what I'm saying? The point is that those muscle fibers, I have strained them to the point that they're not going to leave for a long time because it's always worried that I'm going to make it do something crazy tomorrow. Normal bodybuilding volume training will not do that. You'll get bigger and you'll shrink quick. If I quit lifting now and come and do this seminar, if I just say, the doctors say, hey, Matt, it's time to retire, your body's coming apart, and I retire, I'm going to look pretty much the same next year. But if I was a pro bodybuilder, I would look like an average dude next year. The point is it's a different type of hypertrophy. You need to retain type 2 fibers. If you train your college athletes correctly, they're going to age way slower than the average person. You're going to give them a better shelf life if they do make it to the pros. Because once they do make it to the pros, most of them get to do whatever they want to do. They just don't want to hurt them. If you give them a good work ethic while they're in high school and in the pros, that's going to carry with them. Okay? But if you want to retain type 2 fibers, you have to do dynamic work and you have to do max work. I'm not saying every week, but you need to be in your life, whether it's education, and I'm not going to go all Dalai Lama on your ass, but you need to be comfortable at being uncomfortable in everything in your life. I'm uncomfortable with what I know, so I read. I'm uncomfortable with how strong I am, so I train. I'm uncomfortable with how much money I make, so I work harder. Point being is once you get comfortable, you're not going to be uncomfortable anymore, and you're going to digress. Always push to being uncomfortable all the time. And a lot of that is, well, I'm getting older, I'm not going to max much anymore. Well, maybe you can't max on the exact same exercises, but you still need to strain. Well, I'm not doing sports anymore, I'm not going to work on being explosive. 10 years from now, you're not explosive anymore at all because you're not using it. Another advantage to strength. When strength training, especially squats, as coaches and trainers, we lower RPE, rate of perceived exertion, allow population to increase anaerobic conditioning. So what does that mean? That means more fit, GPP. How many of you guys are familiar with that? To be as strong as I am, and I know that I'm not fit as in a classification of a marathon runner, but if I took you guys through my warm-up, you would fucking puke out there. Because that little stuff you saw the interns doing, imagine doing that. When I do stiff-legged deadlift, sumo warm-up, I do 315 for sets of 25. That's a warm-up before I pull heavy. When I bench, I'll do 225 for 4 sets of 25 before I max. That would be nice for most people to do in the combine. Oh, I did 225 for 25. I did it for 4 sets in 10 minutes and then maxed and still bench 600. But eventually, you're not going to get any stronger if you can't work more. But here's the problem. You can't work longer. You got to be able to condense that training into the same amount of time. So if I were to do a warm-up today on squats, like I'll take a few of you guys, and we probably won't max, but we'll go heavy enough to see some shit go bad. And most of that's for my entertainment, not yours. Because why would I even be here if I don't get to see some of you guys get broke down a little bit? But my point is that you have to be fit enough to fit more volume into a shorter period of time. So my workout, when I'm getting ready for a meet, so you saw that big squat I did with that crazy bar. I did 4 sets of 25 with 315 on a belt squat. I did 100 leg curls, and I did 100 abs of something. I don't remember exactly that day. I got that done in 12 minutes. I rested 5, and I worked up to that squat in 20. So how many minutes are we at now? 35? And then for the next 25 minutes, I did accessory work, 4 or 5 exercises, 3 rounds in a monster circuit as hard and as fast as I could go, and I was out of there in 1 hour and 10 minutes. Problem is when most people get stronger, they start resting longer, especially athletics, right? Because in athletics, we only have a certain amount of time with our athletes. We can't keep them all day. But if I can squat world-class weights and work up to 800 or 900 pounds in an hour, don't give me shit that you don't have enough time to work your athletes up to 350, because I'm just going to laugh at you. Does that make sense? So a lot of it's increasing work capacity. You got to be able to do your warm-up when you get good should consist of some people's actual workouts, if they're lucky. But GPP is key in be able to do difficult things for extended periods. This also has a lot to do with why I build these potentiation warm-ups and start increasing the importance of them as you get stronger, because firemen, they don't have a choice. Like when they come in and there's a fire or they got to pick somebody up, they're on a time limit. The longer it takes them to get to the ER, the closer time it's going to take for them to die, right? The faster they can get those response times down, the more likelihood that the patients live. That sounds pretty important for the firemen in your area, right? They can come in and get the job done really fast and get you to the hospital, because if you have a stroke or a heart attack, every second counts. So my point is that my firemen can jump up off the couch, sprint out to the truck, get to you, your 350-pound overweight booty, and carry your ass to the hospital like that with minimal warm-ups. But if they're used to, well, hold on a minute, let me stretch my IT band, right? Touch my toes. I'm going to do my, right? Okay, I'm ready. You can't do that. So for my first responders, they got to be able to be fit and ready immediately. They don't get chances to warm up. They're sitting in a fire truck, screaming to the place. They got to jump out and be ready. Well, potentiation warm-ups do that as we build up the intensity of it over time. So increased muscle, bone density, injury reduction. That's my leg when I'm big. I'm not that big right now. Bone density was 3.5 times normal. Doctor thought I was freakish. And my legs are 33 inches when I squat world records. Okay? Now, here's why I'm showing you this. I don't do high volume, except for my warm-ups. Everything I do in squats is under 5. Everything I do in deadlifts is under 5, mostly in the 3 range. But that's not necessarily considered hypertrophy work, right? The other thing is I don't do any direct quad work. So the reason my quads are that big is because my ass and my hamstrings and my lower back are that big. So never develop your training based on muscles that people already have. So I don't do any specific quad work, and my quads grow because everything else is growing equally. Does that make sense? But if I were to isolate my quads, I would have had to retire years ago, because I would have started becoming knee dominant. Then I would have tore up my knees or my back. But everything takes equal pressure now. Does that make sense? So my point is that always make sure that whatever you're doing is not training their strengths. Always try to find their weaknesses. My quadriceps, and most of your athletes, their quadriceps are never going to be their weakness. It's always going to be a posterior muscle. So my point is, how do my quads grow if all I work on is posterior chain? That's weird. There's no athlete or citizen that cannot use more muscle mass and bone density. Never to be good, only strong enough to just lift yourself. The problem is that's where you start, okay? Let's just say in a perfect world, we can say that everybody starts aging at 35. And then you lose, let's say, 2% of your strength until you die. Eventually what happens is you can't get out of bed anymore because you're just not strong enough. You don't have the bone density. You stand up, you break your leg. It happens in the nursing home all the time, right? Why? Because they weren't constantly getting up and telling the muscle, hey, dumbass, this is what you're going to have to do forever, all the time. I don't care if you hurt. I don't care if you're sore. I don't care if you're arthritic. You're standing up. One of the coolest things I've seen in the last 5 years, which is not really directly related to what I do, was Dick Van Dyke on like 60 Minutes. Did you guys see that? He's like 94 now, I think, 94, 92. He lifts 4 times a week. And he still gets up and moves and goes dancing and whatever. And he looks like he's 65. And he's like almost 95. And he attributes a lot of it to weight training. And it shows him doing lat pull downs and bench presses, and obviously it's not crazy weight, but he goes, I don't care what I feel like in the morning when I get up, I make myself go. And that's what he attributes to staying alive that long. And being in that, not only being alive that long, but still being functional. Is how many of you guys have missed going to the gym because you just didn't feel good? Everybody can raise their hand. I can raise my hand. Those are the days you slowly start aging, you know? Get up and move. So, these are a picture. These are 2 ladies the exact same age, right? This is your classic old school housewife. We don't lift weights. You know, we don't do cardio. We don't go to the gym. And this is one that kind of broke the barrier and said, you know, I'm going to work out all the time. And they're both 80 years old. That's amazing. But she looks like she's like 45. So I start thinking in my head all the time, it's like, man, if I can just stay strong, you know, I'm going to stay younger a lot longer. I think that's true. But we have to figure out where the deterioration begins. Let's say if I quit training at world-class level now and I bench, say, 6.25, I'm probably going to bench at least 405 until I'm 60. Okay? But if you can't ever bench 405, that's not going to be your deterioration point. Your deterioration point is going to start way lower. So if you're younger, you know, under 45, 50, you need to get as strong as you can before that process starts to happen to all of us. The stronger you are, the harder you are to kill, even by your own body. You know what I mean? So keeping the hips mobile will reduce lower back pain and issues regardless of goals. Stronger squats will strengthen all the knee muscles and ligaments. We know that hip mobility is a key indicator for lower back and knee health. I don't think this is talked about enough, not only with athletes, because obviously most of you are here, you're probably dealing with people that are in their prime. But I would say in the next 30 years, because of population aging, you know, what's the average population age now, like 52? It's something like that. All the baby boomers are the major population. The trick is that when I come into the fire departments, I'm dealing with guys that have never seen weights, or they say they've seen weights in high school. You know how that goes. I always run into this guy that outbenched me when I was 18. You ever notice that? Like, how much did you bench when you were in high school? I benched 500. Oh, I knew this guy benched 550. No, you didn't. But I just listened to it anyway because it's cool to me. Because I'm like, wait a minute, that was like the highest bench in high school in the country that year. So I'm pretty sure your dude didn't do that. But the long story short is that hip mobility is one of the key indicators of lower back problems. How many of you guys have had somebody come to you and say, man, my lower back's killing me? Right? Okay. You could put them in a hip test and see if they're tight or, you know, don't have the mobility. I can almost guarantee you they don't. They don't have the mobility. So when you bend over to pick something up, what do you bend? Your back. It leans over. So hip mobility not only plays a crucial role in how you move and perform these lifts, but it also plays a crucial role in back health, because if your hips are mobile, you'll bend those instead of your back. Pretty simple. But if you deep squat, you back squat all the time, and you're deadlifting all the time, especially sumo deadlifting all the time, your hips are going to stay mobile. You're not going to have back problems. So this is a primary example of how not to squat, if you'd like to know. How many people have seen this? Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. But this is a primary example of how not to squat. This is more common than you may think, sport teams, gyms, performance centers, etc. You see this everywhere. If you guys were analysts of this squat, what's the problem? All the above? All of the problems. Why do knees come in? And? So the knee is trying to create leverage. It realizes that the glute can't help, so it's trying to do everything it can. It bows itself in. You're going to see this with a lot of athletes, tons of them, especially if they come from a really shitty high school that doesn't have a strength program, which is pretty common. And sometimes you're better off getting an athlete in college that's never lifted weights because the chances of a good one in high school is rare. Okay? What's some other things you see in there? Yeah, weak core. Anything else? Looks like the shoe, she's on her toes. Yep, she's on her toes. A lot of times what you can see in a squat, so how many of you guys do like movement assessments? Okay? I can see everything in a movement assessment that you see in a movement assessment, I can see in a back squat. You can see all the problems right here. Obviously, this is a blurry picture, but if this was a detailed picture, I could show you every problem with this squat starting at the foot. Foot pressure is going to tell you every muscle that's working. She has no heel pressure. Her feet are caved in, which means she's not using any glute, which is radiating up to the knee, right? So I would say 85% of what you can see in somebody's wrong in their squat, you can see in their foot. You can block their whole body and look at their foot, and I can tell you what's wrong. The next thing would be shank angle, and that's going to tell you which muscles are activating even more. But most of the squats, you can see all the problems from the knee down, right? But this is knowledge that is earned and not given. So if I can take an athlete and fix their squat in 5 minutes, what takes you 2 years, maybe I'm worth 6 figures and you're not. See what I'm saying? There are major form cues that help all populations learn to squat with proper muscles, which we're going to go over today a little bit. Remember, although that the squat is a major quadricep activator, the key to its use as much as glute and hamstring as possible. You got to use as much glute and hamstring as possible to do the movement. If you don't, you're going to cause form issues, okay? So step one, we're going to treat the squat as a hip exercise, not a knee extension flexion movement, okay? The hips control everything. If you can get the hips to do what they're supposed to do, everything else will follow, okay? So as you can see, that's a little bit of a shin angle forward, but that's actually one of the best diagram pictures I've seen on the internet, as it's not a person, right? So this is me belt squatting 850 for, I think, 800 for 5. The next thing is, how do we work around overtraining the back squat? Well, the trick is having belt squats. So if I do all my warm-ups there, I can do 100 squats. Doesn't put any vertebral spinal compression on me, right? I was talking about that to you, Sabina. Remember, start to change your training because your back's killing you now, and you do a lot of compressive movements without knowing it, and you don't base any of your movements on traction. So this is another big kind of talk that I want to iterate really quickly is, when I go in and do a heavy squat and deadlift or deadlift, some days I don't pull and squat in the same day, 60 to 70% of my work is traction based after that. So reverse hypers, glued hams, 45-degree back extensions, any things of those nature, standing abdominal crunches, say reverse hypers. Yeah, so basically what I'm getting at is that if you compress, you have to pull that pressure back away. So if I smash my spine down with a heavy squat, I got to pull it apart. What you have to remember is that all of the people you deal with, whether it's sports, fire departments, police, athletes, it doesn't matter. Everything that they do in their whole world is compressive other than swimming. Everything they do. Sitting at a desk, walking. Now you're going to add weight training to the mix. In the Army, you're going to add running. And you're going to add rucking with a 100-pound pack. So if I come in and just add more compression to them, I'm not doing my job very well. Same things happen with your athletes. If you're running them and sprinting them and they're doing a bunch of football or soccer practices, all that's compression. What are you doing in the gym that's non-compressive? If the answer is marginal, you might want to rethink your philosophy of how you train people. Because I'm telling you right now, I think that's a big reason why I have women that are around 60 years old that deadlift over 300, why I have world records, and why nobody in my gym's ever been hurt. Because they warm up traction-based, They do all their accessories traction-based, and we selectively pick compressive movements, and we balance out the volume on them. So if they do 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of back squat work, 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of compression work, I'm going to do 6,000 to 10,000 pounds of non-compressive work. Right? I'm going to reset the tape on the spine. But that is a trick that I still have not seen anybody do yet other than me. Talk about, okay, we just did a bunch of compression work, now we're going to do traction work. Right? It's kind of a little bit on the therapy side, but my point is that if I can do a stiff-legged deadlift, I'm going to get a lot of work on my posterior chain. A 45-degree back extension holding a 200-pound dumbbell is the same thing, but it's not compressive on the back, or it's marginally. Make sense? So the key is you have to be witty in picking your stuff and going, hey, this works the same muscles, but it's not compressive or as compressive. You start doing that, it's a big deal. Step 3, we got to push out. The squat is not vertical. It appears vertical, but the squat is actually lateral. Okay? So the first time I ever heard this, I was up at Chicago squatting with Ed Cohen. Does anybody know who that is? Please know who that is. He developed a 901 at 220. Okay? Dude's a freak. And he's also was a freak for 15 or 16 years at the top. That means he had to know what he was doing, and he couldn't overtrain constantly or he'd be injured and out. And what I started to learn was, as a young kid, a punk kid at like 17, I was nationally strong for high school. And Eddie had seen me at a meet. He goes, oh, you're really strong. Couple little technique changes, you could be a lot stronger. I'm like, who the hell's this little midget guy telling me this? I don't know who he is. I just know he shook my hand. He had hands like this big, and he was only like 220 pounds. And my buddy's like, hey, that's Ed Cohen, man. He's like one of the strongest guys in the world. I didn't know at this time. I was like, oh, that's cool. I said, maybe I should go up and listen to what he says instead of having an ego like it's easy to be in high school. I go up there, and the first thing he tells me on the squat is he's like, I want you to try to rip the floor apart. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, I want you to take your feet, and I want you to pretend that you have something you can push away, and I want you to push your feet away from the floor, like outward. I was like, that sounds weird. I thought squatting was like up and down. I said, squatting is only a mirror of up and down. It's only an optical illusion. It's actually an out movement. I was thinking, this guy's smoking too much weed. He lives in Colorado, all right? It's not Chicago. Well, I started practicing it, and by the time I was 20, I was invited over to train at Westside with Louis Simmons, and all those guys, because I learned how to use the right muscles to squat. And it was so weird because who would know that in a normal YMCA or some small town in Indiana that I was from? Nobody. All I was doing was just bending what felt comfortable. So the problem is Olympic-style squatting, although has its merit and benefit, it's a natural way to move. The trick is you want to force other muscles to come into play that wouldn't naturally do that. That's how you lift unnatural weights. But it's also how you train weaknesses. So I started learning how to push out. Squat went from, I squatted 666 my senior year, and when I was 21, I did 903. I was one of the youngest guys to squat 900. So it freaking works. But one of the major points is to push your knees apart. Why would you want to do that? Well, look how much a better line his bones are. You'll never have a knee problem. You'll never tear an ACL or hurt your knee pushing out. I have never seen anybody hurt any part of their body pushing their knees apart. I've only ever seen them get hurt caving in. Ever. In my entire years, 25 years of competing at a world-class level. Because this way is bad, this way is good. You can't really hurt yourself pushing out too hard. It's impossible. But it also forces glute medius, maximus, hamstrings, IT bands, all those things to start coming into play. Whereas if you just bend natural, down and up, it's going to be a lot of knee. Knee's going to travel over the toe. You're going to start using a lot of knee to do that. You got to remember that Olympic lifters have to do that. They have to get the bar minimally as high as possible and crawl underneath it. The best way to do that is to shoot your knees over your toes. That's why Olympic lifting shoes have heels. But don't get me started on that. I did my master's thesis on that, and I picked the wrong set of data, so it came out inconclusive. But a heeled shoe is going to want to push you forward because you're already on your toes. So you want to stay on your heels. Plus, what sport is played in heels? Other than, strippers. You know what I mean? Which, I'm cool with that. I'm just saying, flat-soled shoes are the way to go because that's what most of your shoes are going to be. Okay? If you're on a high 2-inch heel, unless you're training in work boots, the only way I could even see it being marginally effective is if you were training military guys that wear combat boots because they're going to have a high heel. But even then, you want to get them to train with a flat sole. It's how the foot's naturally meant to act, okay? So step 4, now we're going to work our way up. Step 4, you have to have your chest and your head up. I don't know how many times I get on YouTube or somebody's talking about squatting or teaching form on, you know, an Instagram thing, and they're like this. The head follows where the body goes. If you will not see anybody squat 900 or 1,000 like that, because the bar is just going to do this. The trick is you have to lift the chest and at least have the head neutral. That way you can put the weight on your hip. The reason people like to look a little bit down is because when you go down in the squat, you start to ascend down or descend down into the squat. It actually pushes the weight over the knee, makes it more comfortable, like a leg press. But the back is going to be giving out fairly soon once you get strong enough. So what I would recommend is having at least a neutral head, but make sure that the sternum is high. And me and Eddie taught classes in Prague, Amsterdam, and Toronto about this. And we both agree that every lift, the squat, bench, and the deadlift, all require the sternum to stay very, very high. So even if you see a lot of world-class guys that have a neutral or maybe even slightly down head like Dan Green, his chest isn't low. So his head might be down, but his chest is here, right? But as soon as this happens, that's the problem. And Caulfield hit the nail on the head with the warm-up. Remember why he told you to do those shrugs, those bent over shrugs and the rows? A lot of kids do that, or even athletes do that, because they don't have a good neural connection to those upper back muscles. And the only way to create a good neural connection is tons of volume. Tons of volume. Okay, so if you want to know how strong somebody is, you only got to look a few places. Spinal erectors, right, is one of them. If they got monster spinal erectors, that dude is strong. You know, you can have big biceps and not do anything. But if you got a strong lower back and those muscles are like this big around, you have done some major lifting in your life. But the point is that lifting heavy weights and doing them safely is all about maintaining posture. It's all about being able to maintain perfect posture. Once 1 inch goes, everything goes. So that's it with this. That's my contact info. If you guys have, if you're strength coaches, you're like, man, I don't have a big exercise library at Max Effort Work. Dude, I post my stuff up there all the time. So all you got to do is look at it, you know. My Facebook thing is full, but my athlete page or community page, you can like it and it'll still give you stuff on there. And then my website is winningstrength.com. We post a lot of the podcasts that I'm on if you want to hear me talk about other things more. If it's more specific, athlete, military, traction versus compression. Any questions? I'm the last one. We have all the time in the world. So, yeah.
What do you guys use for measuring band?
Well, we use deer scales, honestly. Which sounds kind of crazy, but we use deer scales. That's how we originally measured them, and it seems to work really well. Band tension is a very tricky thing you have to have a lot of experience with. But band tension should never constitute more than 30 to 40% of the actual weight on the bar. So I've walked into a lot of places and you'll see like a fat blue band tied to the bottom of a rack up to a bar and they can't squat 350. Well, you're already at 65% with the band tension. So band tension shouldn't usually always, or should very rarely constitute over 30, 40% of total weight to tension on the bar.
I know Mark Ripito has some really questionable ideas about squatting. Obviously, you're
Oh, you had to do it.
But as a biomechanics guy, do you know why he feels so entitled to say the things he does?
Oh, man, I don't know how to say that on camera. I don't agree with anything he says, and neither does Ed Cohen,
And if you watch people like
and neither does Kurt Kowalski, and neither do I. And it's like, I don't know. And like I said, I think he's a really smart guy, but you got to remember, the hardest part about, and I'm not saying Mark Ripito is guilty of this, you have to discern if somebody teaching you something or somebody marketing something. If his ideas are outlandish, like to me, some of the way he teaches the squat and those things can be a little, I mean, I don't agree with it all, but they're so different from everybody else that you start to wonder, is it a marketing thing? Like, is he just teaching that because he wants to look like he knows something that somebody else doesn't know? But what I do is if I'm gonna look at squat technique, for example, I'm not gonna take one person's word for it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the form of all the world records broken in the last 20 years. My technique matches others' technique about 92%. So my point is that eventually I'm not saying one person knows everything. I'm not saying I know everything. But I'm saying, is it by chance or by smarts that my technique looks like Eddie's, looks like, you know, all these other guys that have broke monster records? I think that's not by coincidence. Mark Ripito never squatted shit. So I'm not saying he doesn't know anything, but I'm saying put 750 on his back, and I want to see him do it in that form, even in his prime.
Read his writing, I just like makes me feel confused because it just conflicts with everything else that seems to make sense.
When something conflicts with everything else, you have to be aware, you have to be weary of it. And like I said, I've read some of Mark Ripito's stuff, and I totally agree with it. And I'm sure he reads some of my stuff and say, yeah, Matt's really smart with this, and he's a dumbass with this stuff. I mean, it just depends on what your background is. My opinion is that I pushed myself to the limit of what my body could do to figure out every little thing I could figure out. That way I felt like I had something to stand on. It's hard for me to talk about technique with people that hadn't pushed my caliber, because you learn that or you don't survive, if that makes sense. So like I learned how to keep my wrist straight on the bench, because if I rolled my wrist like most people do with 615, I'd break my arm. But you can get away with that at 250. You get what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that everything he says is wrong. I'm not saying everything I say is right. All I'm saying is that you gotta look at the whole picture. And I think some of the things he says got some backing and some of them don't. Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, you opened up the Pandora's box when you brought up Verkhoshansky, the grandfather.
Yep. I actually was one of the few Americans to actually talk to him. So if you look up Matt Wenning Verkhoshansky, you're going to see an online talk that he did with his daughter, with me. And it's priceless if you can find it. It's on the internet. I looked it up like a month ago and I still found it. But we had some interaction because our system, at that time I was with Louis, our system was much different than what he had originally designed, but he was interested in it. And I was showing him what we thought, and he was showing me the old block system of what he uses. And I think that system was I'm not saying it's behind what we were doing, but it was the next. I think Medvedev took what Verkhoshansky did and made it better. So our system matched more Medvedev's system, which is who trained Vasily Alexiev and came up with these vast arrays of variability. Whereas Verkhoshansky's still old school, almost Bulgarian periodization style. So I totally agree that it works, but here's the thing. Verkhoshansky's periodization programming blocks find the freaks. It's like Chico's powerlifting programs. There's a couple of guys that have used those and have hit monster numbers, but there's thousands that's been injured from it. So it takes the person, it finds the Corvette out of the Chevettes, but it doesn't make the Chevette a Corvette.
So that being said, when you were younger, did you implement a lot of the stretch shortening work or the ancillary exercises that he incorporated to strengthen up the core?
Give me some examples of what you're saying.
Some of the old heavy boots that he would use and hang a leg, have an uneven pelvis and pick it up to get core stabilization and things like that in some of the other, early Russian journals.
I did that by default, I think. It's funny you say something about weights on feet. I figured something out when it's kind of a personal story. So when I got out of high school, I was kind of a screw up in high school. I didn't have good grades. I got rejected to get into college by far amounts. And so, like any other kid at that time, I'm like, I just need a vocation. Well, all my family were welders and worked with steel, iron workers, pipe fitters. So I go into the pipe fitters union. I meet all these guys, and they're like, hey, you're so smart with this working out shit. What are you doing here? I'm like, I can't get into school. I screwed off in high school. A lot of it was my dad died right before I was a freshman in high school. So I was dealing with a lot of issues I didn't know I had. And I also had some forms of ADD that I know now, but it's gotten better since I was older. I couldn't focus in school. It was weird though. So a year out, I'm working in the fitters union. I'm busting my ass working like 60 hours a week. They called me big job at the fitters union because I would come in, I could carry a 12-foot piece of 6-inch pipe with one hand up the stairs. People are like, how does he do that? I'm like, dude, I'm strong, you're weak, But my hands got really strong, right? My point to the story is that a couple of days a week, I wasn't able to get in the gym all the time. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just wear ankle weights and then I'll help my legs get bigger. So I wear 5-pound ankle weights for a 10-hour day at work. And I noticed my hip flexors and my upper hamstrings got fucking yoked, right? But that's how I figured that out. But I didn't read it from Verkhoshansky. I just was trying to put extra work in. And I was like, I'll just wear 5-pound ankle weights around my boots. So I had these, it looked like I was on house arrest, you know what I mean? Which I probably should have been. But point being is that's how I figured that out. But we did a lot of leg raises when I was a kid. And another thing that doesn't have anything to do with squats, something that I think everybody needs to hear, is Tim Smith, the guy that taught me how to bench, he had a couple American records. He benched 500 at 181 pounds as a junior. So he was in college age, 22, 23. Ended up getting burned out from it and just trained to train and have fun. He wouldn't let me learn how to bench until I could do 5 pull-ups. And he didn't know why. That was the thing, but he figured out that my back had to be strong enough to sustain pressure in the front. He's like, you're gonna be a big dude and you're gonna be strong, but your back's gotta be strong first. So I learned that by default, got really lucky at 13 that somebody wouldn't let me bench until I could do pull-ups. Now I can do pull-ups like nothing and I weigh close to 300 pounds, you know what I mean? But my point is I got my posterior chain super strong first. So then when Tim would say, lock your back in, I would just be like, right? Where a normal guy would be like, they don't have their back locked in. They're using all shoulders and it looks all screwy. I always had a perfect bench form because my back was so strong it locked in. So, any other questions? Yeah.
When you start for beginning athletes, when you start introducing different squat variations, do you wait until they're
Proficient.
proficient in one before moving?
You want how I would do it if I had a perfect world? Is that what you want? Okay, perfect world. Everything's traction based. Form is dictated by weaknesses. If a person squats incorrectly, it's because they don't know how to use certain muscle groups. Can you agree with that slightly? If you don't have hamstrings, are you going to squat with them? Shit, no. If you don't have glutes, you know how to use them, are you going to squat with them? No. Why do people squat with their knees over their toes and it's all quad dominant? Because you use your quads every day for everything. Standing up out of a chair if you're not taught correctly, right? Glutes don't really work unless they're told to work for most people. And we deactivate them constantly in the workforce because we sit down all day. So when we stand up, the glutes are not ready to fire. That's one thing we deal with that I learned in the fire department anecdotally, is that the reason we had so much back pain is because my guys' lower back and glutes were turned off. They were sitting in a chair all day watching TV and then was trying to go off. They got to go pick up a 350-pound person. But all this is disconnected. So what I do to fix that, kind of part of the story, is I make them they have to do 100 reverse hypers every day on duty with only like 25 pounds. They have to do 50 when they get to work and 50 before they leave. So they work about twice a week. Do that for 5 years. Your glutes and lower back are going to be tanks. So when you stand up, they're ready because you've warmed them up 50 times before they ever did anything. Make sense? So here's my point. You want to utilize traction-based movements. You want to get them very strong at glute hams, very strong at 45-degree back extensions, very strong at belt squatting, not because it's traction, that's the main reason, but the other main reason is they're learning to squat from here down. Once they master this, all you got to do is teach this, and they're good. But you add all that in one time, it's impossible, which I'm sure you've dealt with a lot. You get an athlete that doesn't know shit about squatting, they pick up a bar, pick this up, grip this, get your head here, stick your butt back, push, it's too many things. But if you isolate from the hip down, what I do is I take my people that are my clients or my firemen, and they have to do belt squats for 8 weeks. I don't even let them see a bar. Once I teach them that, master that position, put the bar on their back, I don't have to teach anything. They already know how to do it right. Because I created about 2,500 reps of perfect form before they even touched the bar. So now all I got to do is teach them to keep their chest up. That's a perfect world. In a non-perfect world, I would get their core, their lower back, hamstrings and glutes, or whatever I had available as strong as possible, and then I would teach form after I've developed a decent base on that, which is going to take anywhere from 2 to 4 months, right? We got to get away from the fact of saying, well, we just need to get these guys squatting now so that they're good at it. You're actually setting themselves up for failure and bad motor patterns. But if you isolate the weaknesses and build them up and then teach them to innervate, like we kind of do with that potentiation warm-up, you're going to save yourself so much stress and energy of wasted time trying to teach the entire squat. And it sounds stupid because you think it'd be a pretty easy movement to teach, and it's not. Anybody that tells me a squat is easy to do, you're full of shit, or you're not doing it right. Because I have coached Zach for almost 10 years. I've coached myself and others for 25, and I still have my training partners watching me, telling me to push my knees out, pick my chest up. I squat freaking world records, and I still need coaching. So you're telling me you're going to take a normal college athlete and you're just going to teach them in 2 weeks? You'd be better off just teaching them in separate pieces and fixing the weak muscle groups and then plugging in the big lifts. That would be my opinion. Yeah.
How would you talk about like an athlete that's weaker, 95 pounds speed versus somebody who's 200 and change or whatever? How would you do speed work with the
It's a good question. What I would do is, there's multiple ways to skin a cat, but what I would do is I would probably not do speed work with them for a little while. If I were to throw out some bullshit numbers, I would say that speed work for a female is not gonna work really well until you can bench around 100. For males, around 200. Squatting, I would say males 250 to 300, females 150 to 200. That's when you're gonna start being able to actually use speed work, because you're not gonna, if they're so weak that they can't even move the bar fast, you can't do speed work. So you're better off just not doing it and creating a bad motor pattern. Fix the weakest link. So if I got a person that's that weak, I'm focusing on their weakest links and getting them all tied in, getting them beefed up, and then slowly building up their strength and technique. And then once their strength level is at, say, 1 to 1.5 times body weight, then I'm gonna plug in the speed work, in my opinion. I think doing normal speed work with less than that's ridiculous and dangerous. So, you know, most people, oh, he can't do speed work with weights, so we're just gonna do plyometrics. You're wrong. Plyometrics are 10 times more dangerous than weightlifting fast. That's why we tear so many ACLs and we do so much bullshit in the United States. We're not strong enough to do plyometrics. You need to be up around 2 times body weight strength before you even do plyos. Or they're not even functional, you're just tearing shit up. And how many of your guys can squat 2 times body weight, but you go out and jump them all the time, right? But that's why we have the problems that we have. Would you agree? You've been around longer than me, you agree with that? 100%. Okay. Any other questions?
Chain weight about 30%.
Yeah, so I had 700 there, right? 200 chain, so what's that? 25%-ish? See? But there's a trick though, and I don't like saying it because people tend to open the floodgate too fast, but once you get super strong, and I don't really know where that would be, it depends on technique, once you get super strong, the floodgates are open. You can, within reason, do about whatever you want. But for most people, they're never gonna get past that 30% range because you're gonna have to squat 2.5-ish body weight before you can really start playing around with weird shit like that. And the only reason you're really doing that is to make a new environment, you know, so.
Are you still looking for the 3 to 4 second, I forget what recent says, time under tension straining?
Yes and no. It depends if you're gear or raw. This is a powerlifting question. So it has nothing to do with sports. But in my opinion, if I had to do all over again, I think I would have got to that 1,200 pound squat stronger if I'd have done more doubles than singles. And I'll tell you why. Time under tension has everything to do, not necessarily with what you think. It has everything to do with muscle hypertrophy. You gotta be able to keep enough tension on the body that it actually is a stimulus. And ones tend to not be that. Ones are a CNS gauge. They're not a muscular strength gauge. So that's why Wendler's like 531 programs gotten pretty successful with people, because it's a lot of it's 3s and 5s. So if you do time under tension, a 5 rep max that's really heavy is about 12 to 15 seconds of work, minimal. And 3s is around 10 to 12, minimal. Make sense? So you're putting a lot of time under tension, but that's why it works raw. Because in raw training, athlete training, non-gear, you only have your muscles to rely on. Make sense? You don't have all these other equipment pieces that give you more spring and do this and that. So in some ways, geared training is much easier because it's mostly a neurological test, and raw training is easier because it's more of a muscular test. But the problem is that at the elite level of both of those, they're very difficult to understand. You know, because more volume may help the raw, but more volume may help the equipped guy too. So then it becomes individualized. Do you need more muscle mass? Answer yes or no. If the answer is yes, your rep range needs to be more in a 3 to 5 range. If your answer is you're not good at straining 1RM, you might need more 1s. So it becomes a position of what do you need. I would say for overall athleticism, you're gonna need to stay, for max outs, you're gonna need to stay around 3s and 5s, because muscle mass, quality muscle mass, functional muscle mass is still the main priority in most sports at the college level. They don't have enough muscle yet. Or their body fat, let's say their weight's the same, you're 260, but they're 25% body fat, but they need to be 260, 17%. The ratio's off. Make sense? Any other questions? Nothing? All right, that's it. Let's do some squats.